I'm not as young as I used to be, which means I can't treat my body the way I once did. In fact, last year's medical checkup didn't turn out the best, so I decided I needed to change things up and start eating healthier. One of the ways I do that is by making smoothies. But smoothie shop prices can be pretty high, and making them at home always seem like a pain. You gotta pull the blender out, find the right attachments, set everything up, and then cleaning everything is annoying, making it difficult to quickly whip up a breakfast smoothie in the morning. That's why I'm glad to tell you about the BlendJet 2 portable blender. Like I said, it's portable, so you can blend up a smoothie at work, a protein shake at the gym, or even a margarita on the beach. It's small enough to fit in a cup holder, but powerful enough to blast through tough ingredients like ice and frozen fruit with ease. BlendJet 2 is whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up the whole house. That's especially important to me because I wake up before the rest of my family, and once my kids are up, my morning work routine is pretty much shot to hell. And best of all, BlendJet 2 cleans itself. Just blend water with a drop of soap and you're good to go. BlendJet 2 has over 30 plus colors and patterns to choose from, so if you don't like one design, there's definitely one that suits your personality. So what are you waiting for? Go to blendjet.com and grab yours today. Be sure to use my promo code SuperCinemaPod12 to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. No other portable blender on the market comes close to the quality, power, and innovation of the BlendJet 2. They guarantee you'll love it or your money back. Blend anytime, anywhere with the BlendJet 2 portable blender. Go to blendjet.com and use my code SuperCinemaPod12. That's SuperCinemaPod and the numbers 12 to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. Shop today and get the best deal ever.
Return to your body now. You don't have time.
Time is relative. Your body hasn't even hit the floor yet. I've spent so many years peering through time, looking at this exact moment, but I can't see past it. I've prevented countless terrible futures, and after each one there's always another, and they all lead here, but never further.
You think this is where you die?
You wonder what I see in your future?
No. Yes?
I never saw your future, only its possibilities. You have such a capacity for goodness. You always excelled, but not because you craved success, but because of your fear of failure.
It's what made me a great doctor.
It's precisely what kept you from greatness. Arrogance and fear still keep you from learning the simplest and most significant lesson of all.
Which is?
It's not about you. When you first came to me, you asked me how I was able to heal Jonathan Pangborn. I didn't. He channels dimensional energy directly into his own body.
He uses magic to walk.
Constantly. He had a choice. To return to his own life, or to serve something greater than himself.
So I could have my hands back again. My old life.
You could. And the world would be all the lesser for it. I've hated drawing power from the dark dimension. But as you well know, sometimes one must break the rules in order to serve the greater good.
Mordo won't see it that way.
Mordo's soul is rigid and unmovable, forged by the fires of his youth. He needs your flexibility, just as you need his strength. Only together do you stand a chance of stopping Dormammu.
I'm not ready.
No one ever is. We don't get to choose our time. Death is what gives life meaning. To know your days are numbered, your time is short. You'd think after all this time I'd be ready. But look at me, stretching one moment out into 1,000, just so that I can watch the snow.
Let's get my notes.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and if you're hearing some little music in the background, that's my son playing with his toys, so sorry about that. But today I'd like to welcome a new guest to the show and a fellow podcaster, and that is Hugh McStay. Hugh, how you doing today?
Hi, Perry. I'm not too bad. Thanks very much for having me on the show. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this all week.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it too. In fact, fairly recently we had your co-host Ashley on to talk about Tank Girl, and I'm glad you asked to come on today to talk about Doctor Strange. So I'm really excited about that because this is one of those. This has been one of those gaping holes in the MCU that we have not covered yet. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this movie, and I really had a lot of fun rewatching it last night.
When I was going through your back catalogue, trying to pick films, I was actually surprised to see this one was still up for grabs. So this is a film I'm very keen to talk about, very near and dear to my heart, this one.
That is, it's the funniest thing because we'll get people who come on and get, we've done, over 150 episodes now, and people will come in, they'll request the most obscure movies, and I'm looking at it and I'm just like, no one to this day has requested The Dark Knight, which still blows my mind.
That's crazy. You still not covered The Dark Knight? Oh my goodness! I may have to
still
put
haven't covered The Dark Knight.
Yeah,
we could definitely talk about that afterwards. But anyway, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
So as I said, my name's Hugh McStay. I'm a podcaster and writer from Glasgow, Scotland. For many years, I was mostly just a writer. I do a lot of horror film reviews. That's kind of my home is over at the London Horror Society, when I'm one of the staff writers. So covering all sort of new. Initially, it was like UK horror based. We kind of focus on, as you'd imagine, with the London Horror Society. But we've branched out in recent years, and we kind of cover things from all over the globe. So a lot of my critical writing's there. But I'm also a keen novelist and short story writer. I say novelist. I'm still working on my first novel, but I've had about maybe 35, 40 short stories published over the last maybe 5 or 6 years. So like I'm fairly prolific when it comes to that, just, grinding them out. And I just love sitting down to write a good horror story. That's my total jam. And the last year or so, I've kind of fallen in love a little bit with podcasting. Myself and Dan Owen run a podcast called Vampire Videos, where we look back through the last 100 years of vampire cinema. We do films and TV shows, and we always have lots of really interesting guests from the world of horror and beyond on for that. So that's good fun. And probably most relevant to your listeners, Perry, I'm the co-host of Podcast-616 with the wonderful Ashley Thomas, who I believe you had on, you said, quite recently, covering Tank Girl. And we're kind of MCU specific, but again, we branch out every now and again. I think the most recent thing we've done was the Spider-Man movie, the Miles Morales.
Into the Spider-Verse.
Into the Spider-Verse, thank you. Yeah.
In fact, I did listen to that one. I really enjoyed that one. Although, definitely disagreed with you guys on the Kingpin design, because I love that Bill Sienkiewicz inspired look.
Well, yeah, see, that's the thing, as you know, we discussed on the pod. I'm not against the design. It just feels out of place within that portion of the movie. Because obviously the Daredevil comic that it's taken from is a wonderful comic, and the art style on display there is magnificent. For me, the Kingpin design, it just kind of rucks up against the rest of the film in a way that it didn't quite gel for me. But hey, all opinions are welcome.
It's fair enough, yeah. We had covered that back in the first version of the show with my original co-host, and at first he didn't like the Kingpin design either. He had kind of the same reaction you did, and then when I reminded him about that Daredevil comic, he's like, "Oh yeah, that's right." He's like, "Well, I changed my mind."
No, like I said, understandable. I just. Like I said, for me, it was too much of a... See, if he'd come from one of the other multiverses that we experienced in the film, I could totally bought into that design. It's just he looks so caricaturish and so over the top compared to everyone else in that world that kind of took me out of the film. But again, I would like to stress, as I did on the podcast, that that was my only gripe I had about that movie. That is a proper top tier superhero movie, just a wonderful piece of art.
Yeah, absolutely agreed with that. So anyway, that kind of leads to the next question: is what got you into superheroes in the first place?
Oh man, so like I'm a lifelong comics reader. When I was a kid, that was my big thing. It was the X-Men comics more than anything, and I think that's probably tied into the 90s X-Men animated series that was on when I was growing up. So I love the cartoon. and that was kind of my gateway into comics reading. So I followed the X-Men comics quite religiously through the 90s, right up until about maybe 97, 98, all the sort of the Chris Claremont stuff and beyond. And a lot of classic Spider-Man from around that time as well. I've got a particular soft spot for the Maximum Carnage run and all that stuff, even though I think, having revisited it recently, it doesn't quite hold up as well as I remember it, but there's still a lot of fun in those pages. And then I kind of drifted away from comics in the sort of the late 90s, early 2000s. And of all things, it was the Marvel Ultimate run that brought me back. I loved the idea of being able to get back into comics at a sort of ground level with story. So it's like I could come in not having to worry about the 8 or 9 years of storylines that I'd missed, and just pick up a completely fresh take on the Marvel universe. And Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men, they're some of my favourite comic runs of all time. I think sometimes the Ultimate Universe is a little bit on the cynical side, and it's a little bit skeezy, but maybe too much so for my tastes, but there's so much goodness in there. And like I said, the Ultimate X-Men and Ultimate Spider-Man runs are just wonderful. I'm also a big DC fan, but mostly Batman. I was a huge Batman fan in the day, and I didn't collect it week to week, but I would always buy like the trade paperbacks, of the big arcs and story arcs. So I've kind of followed them that way. Some of like the Jeff Loeb stuff in the early 2000s as well, like Dark Victory and Long Halloween. I mean, those are some of my favorite comics. So yeah, I mean, I'm one of these people. It's always been on. I've always kind of had a comic on the go somewhere, and Marvel Unlimited has been an absolute godsend for someone like me who's kind of lost so much time with them at one point. And so I've just spent so much time going back and reading everything that I missed. And yeah, I feel like I'm totally versed in it again. It's lovely.
Yeah, I think I imagine we're probably similar generation, because for me it was very similar story, getting in with the X-Men animated series and then branching from that into comics. I had started reading before the Ultimate stuff, and when Ultimate hit, that was kind of like the peak of my comic reading time. So I definitely dove into those and reread them fairly recently. Ultimate Spider-Man still holds up really well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I got a lot of criticism about Bendis's work on Avengers or Superman, but his Ultimate Spider-Man work, his Daredevil work, Alias, that was just like top tier, great, some of the best comics ever written.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. The Ultimate Spider-Man stuff is really special, and it's funny you should say that you reread it recently. I'm currently in the midst of a reread. I've kind of gone back to the very start of the Ultimate Universe, and that's what I'm doing. I'm picking my way through it all in Marvel Unlimited, and the Ultimates holds up better than I remembered it being. I felt that at the time was so cynical and so bleak, but looking back at it now, it's almost quaint at times, considering the political landscape that we currently have. So yeah, I mean, I think Mark Millar does a lot of interesting stuff, but maybe he lets himself down a little bit at points throughout that run. But yeah, it's been great to revisit it, and I'm really excited to get through it all again, and then maybe have a chat about that somewhere down the road. I've got a couple of guests on the podcast who are big comics fans as well. So yeah, definitely something we'll be looking at on the podcast, I think.
Yeah. We I did a reread of all the Ultimate stuff fairly recently. Miller's stuff, like I said, Ultimate Spider-Man still holds up very well. Ultimate X-Men does not really hold up as well. It's just very much like peak cynical Millar stuff, and the Ultimates is slightly better. If you try and remember that it's not the Avengers, it holds up a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly.
I hate his take on like Steve Rogers and Hank Pym. But the stories are good. The stories in the Ultimates is good. And then when we got to Loeb's stuff, that's a different story.
Well, yeah, no, I agree entirely. I do feel that's where the wheels come off a little bit. But I mean, again, revisiting them, it's fascinating to see how the visual style and some of the story beats have definitely influenced the MCU, and you can definitely see that bleeding through quite a lot. And in fact, just revisiting into the Spider-Verse, some of the character designs there feel like they've just been lifted wholesale from the Ultimate line, which isn't a criticism, because the character designs there are wonderful. So yeah, I mean, it's been fascinating to revisit. And then, yeah, just to continue on from what I said, those comics kind of led me back to superhero films. I'd always kind of tuned into them whenever I could, but I had lost a little bit of luster for them. And I'll be honest, the MCU completely revitalized my love for all things Marvel, and I'm a staunch defender of the MCU, almost to my detriment sometimes. But I think they do much more right than they do wrong, and I think that what they've crafted over, goodness, what is it, 600-700 movies at this point? It's hard to keep track.
It's getting to that, yeah.
What they've crafted and the sort of the interconnectivity and all that. I mean, that's catnip to me. That just pushes all my buttons and absolutely gets me where I want to go.
No, I agree 100%. You're in good company here on that front. I've had some guests on who aren't as keen on it anymore, but like me, I'm still all in. And one of probably the most frequent guests, Adam Garcia, he's always commented on. He's like, oh, I feel like it's hard to watch Marvel movies or something along those lines because there's just so much. And I'm like, I love that stuff. I am completely here for that. I love that it's so interconnected, and by this point you're either in it or you're not.
Yeah, I mean, and like we've guests on the podcast frequently as well. I make a real effort to make sure that we have dissenting voices, because there's nothing worse than shouting into an echo chamber, is there? Because that doesn't help anybody, and it doesn't really stimulate any good chat. But like this notion of having to watch everything and you're missing out, I just don't buy it. I mean, I've always had the same take that I think the end goal for these movies was always for them to be exactly like the comics, in the regard that if you only watch the main films, you'll be fine. You'll be able to follow everything. There may be characters that show up who you're not familiar with, but the film will do a good enough job of explaining who they are and you can understand, much like the comics do. And then if you like a character, you can say, oh, what's going on with Wanda? What's her backstory? Well, there's like a 6-part miniseries waiting for you on Disney Plus if you want to read more or you want to learn more about her. You don't need to watch it, but it'll just add a bit more flavour to the story if you do. So yeah, I mean, I don't really buy into the idea of there being too much. I do think maybe they've lost a little bit of their mojo in the last phase, but nowhere near the levels that I think people would have you believe. I really don't think it's dropped off as much as people think it has.
Oh yeah, I agree with you on that. And in fact, that actually, circles back to what you're saying about Maximum Carnage, right? Because of all the different characters that I'd actually done that recently for the Patreon show with a fellow Scotsman, actually, a buddy of mine, Liam Kerrigan, came on to do that, and yeah, we dove into that one, and it's very 90s. It's very 90s,
yes,
but definitely too many characters, I would argue, but one of the interesting things about it is, very much to your point, you didn't have to know all about these characters when you were reading the story. Yeah. The story gave you everything you needed to know, and if you wanted to go learn more about Iron Fist or Captain America or Firestar and the New Warriors, you could then go do that. Yeah. I don't think anyone wanted to learn more about Nightwatch, though, so you could skip that one.
But I mean, like, there was that, it came to the fore, for me anyway, when they dropped the Marvels trailer earlier this year. And there was a lot of like, oh, so we're going to have to have watched WandaVision to know who Monica Rambeau is. We're going to have watched Ms. Marvel. It's like, no. The film will get you up to speed very quickly. I think Marvel have got a great shorthand for that. They do it really well in almost all of their movies. It's like, you don't need all the backstory. But again, if you go and see the Marvels and you really enjoy it, well then, boy, have I got good news for you. You can go and find out more about these characters afterwards. I don't think it's a prerequisite that you have seen it before you go to the cinema. I just think it would add to your viewing experience if you have, but it's not vital. And I think people need to get that out of their head, because as we said earlier, there's so much Marvel, there's so much MCU. Unless you are a sort of diehard fan like us, maybe you won't get around it all. Maybe you do have to pick and choose. But as long as you're watching those core movies, I don't think you've got anything to worry about, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think Infinity War is probably the best example of that shorthand because, when you get introduced to each of the characters, in each scene, you get exactly what you need to know about them the second they're introduced. Like the Guardians introduction is still like one of the best intros in the MCU. You're in outer space, you got the soundtrack blaring, you got them all in the cockpit singing, and they're just like, oh, we're flying over to check this out. And like, maybe we'll get some money for it, maybe not. And right in that scene, you get the conflicts between the characters. You get a quick shorthand of who all they all are, and I think it helps a lot that James Gunn did some of the writing rewrites, or maybe even wrote the whole scene himself.
Well, I mean, I think Infinity War is kind of the closest we've ever got to having a sort of an event comic splashed up on the big screen, and that's what it feels like. And I do remember, again, there was a lot of criticism at the time from certain quarters that there's not much of a character arc for a lot of the other characters. You know, it's like they all kind of just arrive and they don't really go through many changes. And it's like, well, yeah, but we've got like 20 films that have all got those changes, you know?
So, next thing I want to talk about is talking about the what kind of stuff are you into lately? Like, what's been grabbing your interest these days? It could be anything: movies, comics, TV, anything that's kind of like getting you interested in stuff.
So recently, I mean, I think at the moment my big interest is a British show called, it's not a comic book show, but it's a British anthology series called Inside Number 9. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a wonderful show by two sort of British stalwarts, Steve Pemberton and Rhys Shearsmith. They did the League of Gentlemen back in the day. That was quite a big UK comedy show, and it's kind of an anthology where every week you don't really know what you're going to get. Sometimes it's a horror episode, sometimes it's a broad comedy, a silent episode, and they've just finished their 8th season in the UK, and that kind of encouraged me to go back through their back catalogue. So I'm currently winding my way through that, and it's such a treat. I mean, like the consistency of output over the last 10 years from those guys is remarkable. They write every episode themselves, and they star in every episode pretty much, as well as different characters every week, and it's remarkable watching them. So I mean, that is going to be my big TV love at the moment. In terms of movies, I'm on a bit of a Daniel Day-Lewis kick at the moment. I rewatched There Will Be Blood towards the beginning of the year. It's the first time I've seen it in a long while, and it still stands up as like one of my all-time favourite films. But all it really did was inspire me to, I need to go back and watch every Daniel Day-Lewis performance I can get my hands on. And so, yeah, that's what I've been spending the last few months doing. And he is just, you know, in that way, it's almost a cliche at this point to talk about how great an actor he is, because, you know, they throw awards at him, you know, constantly. But it's true, you know, he does something with a craft that so few actors are doing these days. Every performance feels like a reinterpretation of the form and of himself and what he's given to it. It's been a real treat to go back through that. And oddly enough, I watched. Have you seen the Banshees of Inisherin?
No, but I've heard a lot of people talking about it though.
Yeah, so I mean, I watched that recently, and it totally blew me away. It's one of those films I can't wait to revisit. But that inspired me to do a big rewatch of sort of Martin McDonagh's back catalogue. So it's not many; I think it's only four movies, but each of them feels like this little mini masterpiece. And he feels like a director who's working just now who, whilst he is recognised within certain circles, it doesn't feel like he's had like a big mainstream hit yet, or his name's not widely known. I think it's only a matter of time before we get there, because he is what a talent he is, really remarkable. And I mean, out with that, in terms of my superhero viewing experiences, it's just MCU at the moment. I'm planning a Christopher Nolan Dark Knight Batman Begins rewatch at some point in the near future, because my eldest daughter is quite keen to watch them. She's 16, so kind of just the right age to kind of appreciate the nuances in those movies. So that might be next on the agenda once I get through all my other bits and pieces.
Awesome. Yeah. For my part, like what I think I'm most into right now is season 3 of Superman and Lois. Like I've been watching that week to week, and it is, I think it's probably the best season of that show so far. It's just like it seems to be sidestepping the problem that I think the second season, I felt it was trying to kind of match the beats of the first season a little bit too much, like with the mid-season villain twist and all that. Here they had that to an extent, but it felt a lot more organic with the way they did it in this season. And it's just like the interdynamics, the fact that, you know, I'm not sure if you've watched any of this current season.
No, so I've seen seasons 1 and 2. Loved season 1. I loved it so much. One of my favorite like superhero shows. Season 2 almost lost me, if I'm honest. I stuck out to the end, and it kind of it righted itself, I felt, in the last few episodes. But by about the midway point, I was flagging a little bit. So it's good to hear that season 3 is a bit of a return to form.
It is, yeah, very much so. And even though they replaced the actor who plays Jonathan, I'm still not completely keen on the new guy. I still prefer the other guy, but he does a pretty good job. And there are definitely parts in the season where I'm just like, where I forgot the fact that he was a replacement. So it's definitely good.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely going to watch it when it's. I think it starts in the UK soon, so I will definitely tune in once it's running. But yeah, like I said, I wasn't sure about going back to it after season 2 because it just, like I said, I don't like TV shows when I feel like it's a slog. Do you know what I mean? Where I feel like I'm watching it for the sake of completion, and I was kind of getting a little bit like that with season 2. But like I said, towards the end,
Flash season 7 and 8 was like that for me, and I started watching a little bit of season 9, but it's still got some of that same. But it's the last season, so I got to finish it.
Yeah, whenever I think of the Flash, I have a chuckle for one of the guests that we had on Podcast-616, Craig McKenzie. Because he follows the Flash and he reviews it for his site, and he's in that.
He's been on the show too.
Yeah, Craig just can't let it go. He just has to watch it to the end. And we had him on 616 a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about it like he was a lifer getting out of jail. You know, he's just like, only another 4 episodes to go, then I'm free of the Flash forever. It just makes me laugh. I don't have the staying power for that. Like, I mean, I ducked out of the Flash after 2 seasons. That was enough for me. It's like, no, it's not going where I want it to go. So yeah, I have nothing but admiration for him for getting through that show.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like that with Supergirl, and then in the last season, I'm just like, I'm done. I couldn't finish the last season, but the Flash, I've stuck with it for 8 years. I stuck through season 7 and 8. So at this point, just 1 season more, and I got to finish it up. I got to see Stephen Amell come back as Green Arrow one last time. So I just got to see how it finishes all up.
Well, it's a shorter season as well, so they're being kind to you, Perry.
Yeah,
it's only was it 12 episodes. You can do it. I've got confidence in you. You get there.
Okay. Well, anyway, today, like we said earlier, we're talking about Doctor Strange, the 2016 movie. We had actually covered. Have you ever seen the original Doctor Strange movie from 1978?
No, it's been on my watch list forever, but I've just never gotten around to it. What did you make of it?
We covered it way back in like one of our early episodes. I think like episode 5 or 6 or 6, before episode 10, and surprisingly good. It was surprisingly good for the time. Yeah, I mean, because I was expecting something very kishy, very, very like, very tongue in cheek. But the effects are crap, but the effects aside, yeah, it took itself surprisingly seriously. Peter Hooton played Doctor Strange, and he did a really good job in it. They had, I can't remember the guy who played Wong, but he was also pretty good in it. Jennifer Walter played the villain, Morgan Le Fay in it, and yeah, it was surreal to see her in that, because when I think of Jennifer Walter, I always think of Lucille Bluth. So going back and seeing her in that, and seeing her how young she was when she did that was really surprising. But yeah, like, when you think about it, you got to put it in the time, right? It was 1970, so like even like the top tier TV dramas weren't as sophisticated back then. Yeah. But even for that time, especially, I think if that had gone to series, it would have been a really interesting, like, urban fantasy type series. It would have been kind of like, Buffy or Supernatural, 30 years ahead of its time.
Oh no, it's definitely one that I've been looking to cover for the longest time. But you know what it's like, the watch list gets ever longer, and it just keeps getting pushed further and further down. But I'll definitely visit it. I promise, definitely.
Yeah, I'd say it's worth a watch. I was surprisingly taken with it, a lot more even than like the fairly recently we'd covered the Incredible Hulk pilot, the 1977 one. I actually thought it was superior to the Incredible Hulk one.
Oh,
and
wow.
That's regarded as like, kind of a classic for the time. This was, and it's funny when you think about it, because it came out before Superman the movie, and it took itself, just arguably, I'd say, more seriously than Superman the movie took the source material.
I mean, that's interesting, because on Podcast 616, we tend to just do sort of like we look at modern MCU, modern films that are coming out, and modern TV shows we cover. But we do have a special episode called Marvel Tat that Ashley generally heads up, and she's covered in fact, pretty much the entirety of the Incredible Hulk on there with a few guests, and yeah, she's got a list as long as your arm for like those kind of Marvel projects that she wants to go back and do. So Doctor Strange is definitely on that list. I think we also want to do the original Captain America movie from the 90s.
We've done that.
One,
Yeah, that.
yeah.
Although interesting piece of trivia on that is Ronnie Cox. He plays the president in that. He was also he was the corporate bad guy in the first RoboCop movie.
Yeah.
And he said that the script was like the greatest script he had ever read. And he doesn't know what they did to that script because what came out the other end was just complete garbage.
See, I've got really fond memories of that film. I don't remember any of the specifics, but as a kid, I had it on video cassette and I must have watched it about 50 times. If you were to ask me right now to describe what happens, I have no recollection of it. I just remember like 10-year-old Hugh loved that film so much. So yeah, I cannot wait to get back to that one. So I mean, there's a certain charm, isn't there, about those films? You know, where they're giving it their all, even though it's clearly not working. You know, that they're putting everything into it, and you can appreciate it on that level, I think. So yeah, no, definitely they will be on the Marvel tat list that we'll get to eventually.
Okay, all right, yeah. So what's your history with Doctor Strange? Were you a fan of him at all in the comics, or was this kind of like your big introduction to him?
Honestly, this was kind of my big introduction to him as a character proper, because he'd always been someone who would show up in other things that I'd read rather than be. I didn't really read the Doctor Strange comics at all growing up, but obviously you know the Marvel comics are like, you know, there's characters popping up left, right, and centre all the time. So he was a character I was aware of. I'd read some bits and pieces. I'd seen some stuff with the Nightmare storyline that they did as well. That, you know, because he's obviously a recurring villain. But in terms of the meat of the story, I knew the broad strokes, but I didn't really know anything other than that. So I actually think that kind of helped when I went to see this movie, and it probably, you know, informed why I'm so fond of it, because I don't really have any issues with changes that they may have made, or, you know, slight character discrepancies, because it was all largely new to me anyway.
Yeah, I very similar. Like I was slightly more familiar with him. I wasn't as familiar with like his solo comics, but I had done probably about maybe 10 years, 8 or 10 years before this movie came out, I did a big dive into the classic Defenders comics. So
right,
okay. And he was like the mainstay of that team.
That's right,
so
yeah.
like I read that entire run. It was like what, like 100 plus issues and 100 issues and change. And like the Steve Gerber stuff, the J.M. DeMatteis stuff was far and away like top tier 70s Marvel. And so that was where most of my familiarity came was from that. And just like seeing him playing off like Hulk and Valkyrie was just a lot more fun for me. Whenever I tried to dive into his solo stuff, it was a bit more of a slog, to be honest. It was a bit harder to get into. Like even like Warren Ellis even did a run on him in the 90s. And that's out in one of the Epic collections. And I tried reading that, and it was pretty slow. And that surprised me because Warren Ellis's Hellstorm run is one of my favorite, you know, supernatural Marvel comics that he did also around the same time. And so I was expecting what he did to Hellstorm to also be like what he did to Doctor Strange, and it really wasn't. And I think the character just, I don't know, the way the character was written in the comics, he just felt very, I guess maybe stuffy is the right word. He just never felt like he had a whole lot of range. I think Jason Aaron's run from a few years ago, that kind of changed a little bit of it. And I found myself enjoying how he depicted Strange in that. And I think that was very much influenced by what Cumberbatch had done in the movie, because I was completely taken with Cumberbatch's performance in this movie and continuing on in the other films too. And I think the changes he brought to the character really made him a lot more interesting for me.
Yeah. It's funny you should mention Cumberbatch in particular, because I remember at the time there was when the film came out, there was a lot of discourse around him maybe being, you know, slightly miscast, or that they were trying too hard to make him like almost a knockoff Tony Stark, you know, like a mystical Tony Stark. And I don't think that's quite the case. I really like the sort of the arrogance that he has in the role, and it works for him because he doesn't have enough charm initially to to be as likable as Tony Stark is when when he's putting people down, he's making all these quips. But again, that just adds to the character for me because it makes him stand out as something a little bit different.
Yeah.
And if I'm honest with you, I think the scripts don't serve him particularly well when they try and shoehorn in the sort of like the Marvel quips that we've become so used to under sort of the Joss Whedon school of writing, where everybody's got to have something funny to say all the time. And I think that's when it falls flat. Whereas a lot of the humor that works for Doctor Strange, not just in this movie, but like across them all, is in Cumberbatch's mannerisms and his delivery of lines, not so much the dialogue itself. And I wish that they would lean into that a little bit more and stop having them like with these one-liners that just don't work. It's like there's a few absolute clunkers in this one and in Multiverse of Madness where you just think, yeah, you wrote that with Robert Downey Jr. in mind. He could say that and get a laugh at the audience. When Cumberbatch says it, it's like it doesn't quite land. But there's so much else about the performance, and there's a real gravitas to Cumberbatch in the role, and like the scenes early in this film where shortly after his accident, where he's trying to come to terms with what his life is now, I think he's devastatingly good. The scene between him and Christine Palmer in his apartment where he's lost everything and he lashes out at her and pushes her away as well. I mean, I think in a lesser actor's hands, that scene comes across as a bit sort of rote, a little bit trite, and doesn't quite land. But Cumberbatch really, really sells it, and Rachel McAdams is wonderful. I think she's very much wasted in this film, but she's a wonderful actress, and she bounces off him so well. And yeah, those are the facets of the character I find really fascinating in this film, and it's something I kind of hope or wish that they would maybe focus on a little bit more as the character progresses.
No, I agree with you completely. One of the things that I love about Cumberbatch's performance is the whole idea that, and this is it is a very similar style to Tony Stark, where he's the smartest man in the room. He knows he's the smartest man in the room, and he wants you to know it too. And I think you're right. I think sometimes they play that like, oh well, it's the same thing, so let's give him the same lines. It's different. He's a much drier version of that, and he's a lot more biting and acerbic, I think. And I think my favorite interaction was actually in Infinity War with him and Tony Stark, where Tony is trying to act like he's the smartest one in the room, and Strange is like, no, it's me, and he completely knocks him down every time. And I didn't even pick up on this until last night, but one of my favorite lines in Infinity War is when he says to Stark, he's like, unlike everybody in your life, I don't work for you. And then I picked up, that's actually an echo of the line that Wong says to him here when Strange is making all these quips to Wong, and Wong's just like completely deadpan. And then Strange like, people used to think I was funny. And Wong says, did they work for you?
Yeah, it's I think that there's a huge difference in the portrayal of each character, but I still think sometimes the writers haven't caught up with that yet, and they still it's something that they need to learn from. It's not really a huge issue because I do think that Cumberbatch is such a strong actor that the strength of his performance kind of overwhelms any shortcomings in the dialogue. So I think it still works really well. And you mentioned Wong. I mean. Benedict Wong is he's a bit of a stalwart of like UK sitcoms. I mean, I know him from like dozens of like one-off appearances. He's a great character actor. He's very, very funny. And if you were to tell me 10 years ago that Benedict Wong would be such an integral part to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it would have blown my tiny mind because it's crazy how far he's come. And revisiting this film, it was interesting to see that they hadn't quite got the character yet, had they? They hadn't quite landed on what he was going to become. But yeah, it's funny to think of him now being, the Sorcerer Supreme, and he's almost like he's become a bit of a sort of Phil Coulson, hasn't he? Showing up in various properties to kind of link them together. Because obviously he's in Shang-Chi and he shows up in She-Hulk, and there is a feeling that Wong might be the one that's going to pull everyone together for whatever the next big threat's going to be.
Yeah. It's funny watching this last night and then seeing how far that character has come. And you just blew my mind though when you said that he's a stalwart of British. I had no idea he was British, because his American accent is so well done in this movie, especially compared to, I mean, Cumberbatch. I'm not sure why they had Cumberbatch use an American accent. To be honest, I think it would have been perfectly fine. I think it would have worked better if he had just used his natural accent.
Yeah, I agree with that. It seems like an odd choice because, again, they're not as beholden to the comics as some people would like, but I think that's a strength in the
Mhm.
MCU. It's like the comics are a jumping off point to tell the story they want to tell. So do you
Right.
know what? See, if you want Doctor Stephen Strange to be British, that's fine. Let's have him be British. It's not a problem. And Cumberbatch, I think even by the time he was cast here, was quite a recognisable face across the
Mhm.
pond because of his work in Sherlock.
Yeah.
So it probably did come as a bit of a real sort of what's he doing? What's that voice? Even though I think his accent is okay, it's noticeably American
It
because
is noticeable. Yeah.
you're so familiar with Benedict Cumberbatch's accent that
Yes.
it's like,
Yeah.
it's a while
In
for the
fact,
ear to adjust.
I think when this movie came out, I had just finished doing a binge of Sherlock. So when I went
Mm.
and watched it, I'm just like, I was completely taken aback. And I think it actually took me out of the movie the first watch a lot because just like
Mhm.
how different his voice was. And
Yeah,
I was not expecting that. And I think it felt so unnecessary because even if you're sticking very close to the comics, there's nothing really in Doctor Strange's background that says he has to be a native New Yorker. He lives in New York, but there's nothing about that says he has to be a native New Yorker. I mean,
mhm.
as a comparison, like I'm watching, I just started watching the Undoing on Max now because I'm canceling the subscription because fuck Zaslav and so I'm trying to watch like all the stuff that I've been meaning to check out and you know um what's his name the
Hugh
rom
Laurie,
com not Hugh Laurie no the rom
Hugh
com
Grant.
Hugh Grant, yes, he's in it and
I know all the Hughes, Perry. I know them all.
Yeah, yeah. So Hugh Grant's in that, and he's playing this doctor in New York, but he's still using his British accent, and it works fine. I'm like, there's no reason you couldn't have done that with Cumberbatch in these movies.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, it's, in fact, just speaking of Hugh Laurie, there's another one. I mean, I'm a big fan of House. I loved that
Mhm.
show when it was on. But as a viewer who knew Hugh Laurie for years growing up as as the sort of the comedy foil in Blackadder,
Mhm.
with this very posh upper class British accent, again, it took forever to get used to that accent. And again, I think it's a perfectly fine American accent that he's doing,
Oh yeah, yeah.
but it just took forever for my ears to kind of ignore the fact that he wasn't using his actual accent. So, yeah, I think it's a problem, but it's not one that I've let deter me. And I think how many appearances are we in now? Like 5 or 6 by this point.
Mhm.
I think it's almost completely gone now. I don't really think about it all that much.
Yeah, I've gotten really used to it now, and it doesn't bother
Hmm.
me as much as it did on the first viewing. I think by the time we got around to Infinity War, I think I had accepted it that just this is the way it is. I think it
Yeah,
would have been better the other way, but it's working fine. And like you said, like Cumberbatch's performance is so good. He brings so much to the character that
yeah,
it's not a big distraction in the end.
hmm yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
Now I think this was I think when I was thinking about the origin story movies last night that Marvel has done, I feel like outside of Iron Man and whether or not you want to call Guardians of the Galaxy an origin story movie is, you could say it is, you could say it isn't. But I think
Hmm.
outside of I'd say it's not so much. It's where the team got together, but they all had their own backstories going into it. So I don't really think of it as an
Yeah.
origin story as much. But I think of the origin story movies, like Iron Man, Captain Marvel, First Avenger, Thor, all those. I feel like this, outside of Iron Man, this is probably my favorite of the origin story Marvel movies.
Yeah. See, that's interesting. I wrestled with this before before we began recording. I've been kind of going over the list in my head, and yeah, do you know? I think I might agree with you. I do have a ridiculous soft spot for the first Avenger. I love that film. I do. I think
Mhm.
it's one of the MCU's proper underrated gems.
Oh yeah.
Um, but yeah, this film is terrific. I mean, really, there's so many interesting details in this film going on just in the margins of it, and it's so rich with with impressive visuals, and I think it benefits from having a director like Scott Derrickson who has such an eye for these things, and
Mhm.
he's got such a. I think he's even at this point in his career, there's a confidence about the way in which he directs this film and the way in which everything's put together. And those trippy sort of psychedelic effects that we get and those battles in the mirror universe, which look astounding and deserve to be seen on the biggest screen imaginable. I mean, this was the first Marvel film I saw on an IMAX screen, and I'm glad that I did. But even through all that chaos, he's so good at laying out the geography of what you're watching. So you never really feel lost. You know, you're always going with the story. And yeah, like I said, I think because Cumberbatch is such a talented actor, he really gets across a lot of the emotion of what's happening, which sometimes gets lost a little bit in an origin story. Very often, how many times do you see that, you know, you get an origin story and the hero's often not the most interesting thing in the origin story, and it's quite disappointing. I don't think that argument can be made here. We can maybe talk a little bit later, actually, though, about the villain issue that this film has, because I do think it is a kind of one of its glaring problems. But yeah, no, I think I would agree with you. Interesting what you say about the Guardians, because I've made that point before. I don't really consider that an origin story either, because the characters all arrive sort of ex nihilo. They're exactly fully formed in who they were. You know, they go on character arcs throughout the three films by all means, and they change and they grow. But like the work's been done before we get there. You know, Drax is who he is, and you know, the weight of their history is brought to that movie. Whereas here we get a proper sort of like, right, what is Doctor Stephen Strange? What is this world? And also, I think this film's got like a big job in its hand for an origin story, because not only do we have to bring in Doctor Stephen Strange and establish who he is, and because, you know, they were setting him up from the get go. Let's be very clear, from the get go, he was going to be an integral part of the MCU moving forward, and that's kind of how it's turned out to be. But they also have to introduce the idea of magic to the MCU after.
Right.
I mean, how many years have we been going at that point? Nine years in? Was it about that route? 8, 9 years? I think
a little bit. This was probably like 8 years, I think, because 2008 is when it started.
Right. So say 8 years in, and now after getting all these superheroics and these like space opera adventures, now you're going to introduce, and there's also magical realms and demons and monsters. And I mean, that's a big ask for a film. And the fact that this film handles it so elegantly and with such beauty at times, I think that gets underestimated sometimes, how much work this film had to do to convince audiences, and it does it so easily.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think, you know, Thor it kind of towed that line. It came right, but it came close to that line, but it didn't quite cross it, because there's that whole line in the first movie where he says, you know, you call it science, your ancestors call it magic, but I'm from a place where they're one and the same. There's also the part in, and then you get to the Dark World where they've got, like, you know, spaceships and stuff like that. They're flying around, and that one scene where Jane's being examined in the by the Asgardian healers, and they're like, oh, it's a soul forge, and she's like, no, it's this, you know, whatever, like, you know, molecular or whatever type of thing. And it's like, yeah, it's just they're using different names for sci-fi stuff, basically, and they're using magic names to describe sci-fi stuff. So it's very much more in the sci-fi realm in those. And then you get to this, and yeah, I'm pretty amazed at how well they were able to introduce the concept of magic. Multiverse too. This is the first mention we get of the multiverse here. And we're, you know, and when the Ancient One says, you know, she's like, you know, we call them spells, but if that word offends you, you could call them programs, right? And she's talking about it as like, you know, we're taking these energy from other dimensions, and it works. It works in this way that, you know, it explains it, and it doesn't become too woo-woo. It doesn't become too fantasy-esque. It still grounds it in a type of reality, which then ends up letting us when we get it to Multiverse of Madness, then we're able to just like cut loose and be like, yeah, it's magic now.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, there's an elegance to it because it almost like sneaks it in under the audience's nose. You know, you've turned up to watch a superhero movie, and I would imagine the average moviegoer doesn't know Doctor Strange is like a magician. You know, like to use those base levels. They just think, oh, it's just another superhero. Let's find out what that is. And it probably is a bit of a, wait a minute, magic realm. They've got magical books and spells, and, you know, is Dumbledore going to show up at some point? I mean, what's happening? But they do it just matter of factly. And I think a lot of that, if I'm honest to you, is down as well to Tilda Swinton's performance as the Ancient One, because she presents the sort of the reasonable, logical face of what is an absolutely insane concept, but she explains it so calmly and so with so much humanity that you just accept it. There's no, the audience has an immediate buy-in because of the way in which the rules of the magic are explained. As you said, that lovely line about, well, if this offends your sensibilities, you can refer to them as program. Because that's what we're doing. It's the programming language of the world that we are able to alter. Yeah, I mean, I just very quickly on till this one. I think she's great here, and I totally get the sort of the whitewashing issue with changing that character. And I think it's absolutely fair. I would not disagree with anyone who has an issue with that. But just taking the character for what's presented on screen, I think it's a wonderful performance. I always remember, even at the time after the first time I watched this, being very disappointed that this was a sort of a one and done for Tilda Swinton. I know she returned in Endgame, but this is a character I wanted to see more of, and I just wish that they maybe kept her around a little bit longer. Maybe one more film before they decide to put her out to pasture.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the Tilda Swinton thing and the controversy about that, because I'm of two minds of this, because I get the whole whitewashing issue. I totally do. And Scott Derrickson had said that he had originally wanted to cast an Asian actress in that part, but he was worried that it would seem too Dragon Lady-esque, and it would just present a different problem from, the classic, wise old Asian man from the comics version. So I get wanting to do like an Asian woman instead. I thought that would have been interesting, but at the same time, I can understand why he's saying it's like we were worried that would be also too stereotypical. Honestly, maybe you should just cast a black
I don't know what you think,
instead.
but I mean, yeah. I don't know what you think, but I find the MCU generally to be pretty good when it comes to diversity. I do think they make an effort. I do think that it doesn't always work, and they don't always land on the right side of the line. But I think it's kind of admirable that they do put the effort in. And I appreciate, it's all feeding the capitalist machine. It's all the Disney global empire. I get all that. But sometimes you just have to take the win where you can get it, right? And you look at a film look, Shang-Chi is probably the best modern example, isn't it? I mean, Shang-Chi is a wonderful movie. I've got a lot of time for that film, and it's it's very, very much focused on the idea of diversity, and they lean into that. And the entire film is filled with these absolutely amazing Asian actors, and behind the scenes as well. They've got people from that background who are contributing to the film and writing the film, directing the film. So I do think Marvel generally get it right, or at least they look like they're trying to get it right. And so with something like this, I kind of buy Derrickson's explanation. I wouldn't really, but that's easy for me to say as a sort of like white Westerner looking at this. It's easy for me to say, oh yeah, that's fine. So I do get the pushback, and if someone of like Asian heritage does have an issue with that, I don't imagine myself saying, no, you're wrong. It's fine for what they did. But I can only speak personally, and I think Derrickson's explanation kind of stands up quite well. There are other franchises and there are other studios that I think do have issues with this sort of stuff. I really don't think Marvel do. I think they make a big effort with it. And like I said, maybe it's not enough. In fact, let me be very clear. It isn't enough. They should be doing more, but it's a step in the right direction. Yeah.
Well, also, I think with the Ancient One, you're kind of in, you're kind of between a rock and a hard place, because I don't think there's any way you can cast that character that's not going to have some controversy attached to it, right? Because it's such a problematic character to begin with that there's going to be some issue with it. If you cast an Asian actor, then it's it's stereotypical part. If you cast an Asian woman actor, then it's a different kind of Asian stereotype. If you cast a non-Asian actor, then it's Asian erasure. So there's no real someone's going to be pissed off no matter what you do with that part.
Well, it's like it's like Iron Man 3, isn't it? When we heard we were getting the Mandarin, and now I know this is a controversial topic, right? I know people like to get quite angry about Iron Man 3 at times, but I love the twist there. The fact that it's just this absurd persona that they've kind of put out there, and that was a neat trick of Shane Black's to kind of sidestep that issue. Because in a lot of interviews he did around the time after the film was released and The Secret was out, he was very candid about it. It's like, that is a deeply racist, stereotypical part of the Marvel canon. The Mandarin is this sort of evil, inverted commas, yellow menace. A truly awful depiction of Asian stereotypes, right? Horrendous. But then you look at what Shang-Chi does with the same idea, and it's so elegant where you actually have Wenwu, talking about how the Westerners refer to me as a Mandarin, the Mandarin, and then he starts to deconstruct how ridiculous and silly it is, and I love that. I mean, that's kind of that's the script wrestling with the studios of the company's really dubious past, and kind of putting it up there on screen to be mocked and laughed at, rightly so, but coming from someone, but from a character who has the sort of the justifiable reasons to mock it and point it out. I love the way that they handle that. But I think you're right here. It doesn't feel like there's a clean answer, does it? It doesn't feel like there's a right or a wrong. It's kind of like,
right,
I accept wherever you fall on this, because it's a difficult one to wrestle with.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked about the Mandarin stuff in Iron Man 3. We did a whole episode on Iron Man 3, but I will say this, that I hated it at first, and my attitude at the time was there's a way to do the Mandarin that avoids the racial issues, but without having to make him a joke. And I thought that, in fact, what they were doing in the first part of Iron Man 3, like, I loved Ben Kingsley's performance in the role of the Mandarin. I thought that was a really interesting updating of it. And then I said, but even still, like, you could do it with an Asian actor. And I think that my go-to at the time was like, you get someone like Tony Leung and you bring him in and he could do a really good job. And everyone's like, oh no, it can't be done. It can't be done. And then we get Shang-Chi, we get Tony Leung himself as the Mandarin, and it works, and he's able to do it. So I'm like, see, it can be done. So I think, there was definitely, like, I've come to terms with it, because obviously they gave me exactly what I said I wanted. So I'm fine with it now. But at the time I was very incensed about it because of I felt there was a better way to do it. I still have other issues with Iron Man 3, but the Mandarin stuff I can live with now because of what came after.
Yeah, my co-host on 616 virtually spits every time I mention Iron Man 3. She's so disgusted by that film. I've always had a soft spot for it, if I'm honest with you, Perry. Even at the time, I remember coming out the cinema and just thinking that the undercutting of the Mandarin was just a hysterical reveal, and it really worked for me. And I was really surprised when I went online and I saw there was a proper angry backlash from a lot of the fans. And the longer I sat with it, the more convinced I became that I'm still quite happy that I really enjoyed it. But I get where people are coming from, But I've got a soft spot for Iron Man 3. That's a really interesting film.
That is probably the most divisive Marvel film that's been made.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, because like I don't even think there's people who are indifferent to it. It's like you either really think it's great or you despise that film, and that's tends. People have changed their minds and maybe warmed to it over the years. But like I remember at the time, it was a proper, some of the reviews at the time as well. There were some reviews that were glowing, talking about how it's like, oh, such a unique MCU movie doing something completely different, and then other reviews which were just tearing it to shreds. Yeah, I'm definitely in the pro Iron Man 3 camp. I'm afraid you'll need to chalk me up there.
Yeah, I hated it initially, and I've softened on it. It's still maybe not even my least favorite now. I think Eternals would probably be my least favorite, but it's definitely not a movie that I'm rushing to run back and rewatch.
I think maybe my inherent Shane Black bias is showing as well. I'm a huge fan of Shane Black as a scriptwriter. In recent times, he's maybe fumbled a little bit, but like generally, I think he's a terrific writer, and he's got such an interesting writing style that I think really suited Downey Jr. Obviously, with Kiss Kiss Bang Bang a few years before Iron Man 3, like I think his writing brings the best out in Downey Jr. sometimes, and I think for that alone, it was kind of enough to give me a big buy-in for that film.
I love Shane Black, but that was my issue. Is it felt it was too Shane Blacky, and it felt like it overrode the fact that it's supposed to be a Marvel movie first and a Shane Black movie second. And I think and I think this is an issue that Marvel has, where sometimes you have directors who completely disappear in the movies and you can't really tell if it's their movie. Whereas then you've got like Shane Black, who it's very much a Shane Black movie, and you can tell it's a Shane Black movie. But I think there's a better balance. I think Scott Derrickson does it in this. I think he strikes a nice balance where this feels like a Scott Derrickson movie, but it also fits them. I mean, James Gunn does it the best, I think, of all of them, right? His movies feel like James Gunn movies, but they also seamlessly fit into the MCU.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mentioned earlier, I mean, I was a big Scott Derrickson fan coming into this movie as a horror critic and writer. Like I think Sinister is one of the best horror movies of maybe the last 15 years or so. I think it really works. It works as a sort of like a crowd pleasing horror movie, whilst also retaining some genuinely nasty moments and like shocking scares that work so well.
I still have to see
And
that.
like it's well worth your time. And the exorcism of Emily Rose is an
Oh,
interesting
he did that.
idea.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
the execution of that film is terrific. Even though I don't think it all hangs together perfectly, there are like 2 or 3 moments in that movie which will live with me until my dying day. So absolutely like scared the wits out of me in the cinema. Really, really got to me. And so yeah, so when he was coming on to direct this, I was very excited because I thought, well, you know, Marvel are taking a bit of a well, yeah, probably a bit of a risk given a film like this to a horror director. And again, he skirts the lines brilliantly. He does exactly what you want from the movie. It's not scary because that's not the remit of this film, but like he captures such a unique visual style.
Yeah.
That's the thing I keep coming back to over and over again with this film in particular is just how different it looks to everything that had come before it in the MCU. And I think a lot of what Derrickson establishes here has created a bit of a sort of it's created like the sort of the hub of the MCU's visual storytelling. I mean, the portals, for instance, is probably the best example of that, isn't it? The portals that are created here for the first time we see them on screen. I mean, I don't know about you, Perry. I love Endgame. Right? It spoke to my 10-year-old Hugh, who would have killed for a movie like that at that age. And the portal scene is one of my favorite moments in cinema. I love it, and every time I watch it,
I
even
flipped
now,
the fuck out in that scene.
yes,
I mean, I was in the
even
theater,
now,
and as soon as they had that little crackle of Sam's
yeah.
voice in his ear, I'm just like, oh my god! And I see all the portals opening, everybody's coming out. And I'm like, oh my god, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And like I was sitting next to my fiance, and I'm like, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And then all of a sudden, and then he says Avengers Assemble, and I'm like, yes, yes. And people in theaters in Japan do not react to movies, so like I flipped the fuck out in that scene.
You know, it's fun. It's a bit like that here as well in the UK. We're not big on like crowd reactions, but you could feel this ripple of energy and love and joy in the cinema at that moment, and it was so beautiful. So I mean, you don't get that without Doctor Strange and without the establishing of that as a thing, and then it just shows up all the time now. Which I think it's funny how we've taken it for granted. I mean, it shows up in She-Hulk when Wong's jumping through portals. It shows up in Shang-Chi. It shows up in Guardians of the Galaxy 3. We've got one of the Ravagers is got the sling ring and opens the portals at one part in the film. And yeah, I mean, and the work that Derrickson establishes here and does in this movie, which then carries over to even the second film, Multiverse of Madness. I mean, there's a lot of visual shorthand from this film to that film. Again, it staggers me that this film doesn't get more love, if I'm honest with you.
I agree with you. I mean, this film does have some issues, and we'll talk about Caecilius. I think that's the big thing that's the big elephant in the room to talk about with this movie. But yes, as far as the visuals go and what it does to set up Doctor Strange, I mean, like this could have gone very bad, and this could have ended up being a complete nonsense film to fans of the MCU. And it was like I could because I know lots of people who are not familiar with the comics at all, but who love the MCU and are completely invested in it. And I could have very easily seen like comic fans coming. You could have had a very similar reaction to Iron Man, like an opposite reaction of Iron Man 3, where when Iron Man 3, if you were much more tuned into the MCU than the Iron Man comics, you probably fell more on the side of loving Iron Man 3. If you were more tuned into the Iron Man comics, you probably fell on the side of despising Iron Man 3.
Yeah,
I feel like you could have gone the opposite way with this, where if you were tuned into the comics, you would have come out loving Doctor Strange if they had made it very true to the comics. But you could have also come out being an MCU fan, being completely confused. Like, wait, magic? What? And Derrickson was able to find a way to very seamlessly integrate the whole idea of magic and the multiverse and to easily slot it into the MCU. And then, like you said, create this visual shorthand that is still with us to this day. And just like some of the I think one of my favorite sequences in this movie is when he meets the Ancient One for the first time, and she sends him through
Yeah.
that like psychedelic journey. I'm like when he's looking at his hand, and each finger is growing into another hand, which is growing into another hand, and it's just like nonstop, infinitely. And then my favorite shot though is when he's falling into his eye, and he's like grabbing onto
Yeah.
the edge. It's like, oh my god, this is amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's almost a magic trick in of itself how easily Derrickson got the audience to buy into what he was doing, because, like you said, as we mentioned earlier, it just happened very naturally. You know, it doesn't feel like a big leap to go from the world of superheroes and space opera to the world of magic and mysticism. It just feels like a natural next step, and it's become more impressive with hindsight because I look at the current the current phase that we're in with the multiverse saga, and what are we? We're 10 movies in, maybe 6 TV shows into the saga, and I still can't really tell you what the multiverse is in any concrete terms, you know, because every film has kind of muddied the waters a little bit, or like Loki had what 8 episodes to explain it to us, and didn't really give us a clear answer on it. I just wish we'd a film already that was in the same way that this film introduces the realms of magic and mysticism. I wish we'd had a film that was very concentrated on what the multiverse was. It's all half answers and obfuscated responses you get, and I think that's why the general audiences aren't buying into it quite as much as they were for the previous saga, because it is still too muddy, and they haven't clearly set the boundaries and the rules for what it is.
I agree with you. Like, for the most part, I liked Multiverse of Madness. I know that's kind of a controversial take now, apparently, but I enjoyed it for the most part. But I agree. Like, that was a movie where I felt like, for a movie called The Multiverse of Madness, I was expecting a whole lot of stuff to deal with the multiverse in it, and it just kind of wasn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm like I said, I very much I want a film or a show to sit me down and speak to me in plain terms and tell me, how does the MCU's version of the multiverse work? Because there's been no firm answers on it. You know, they dance around multiverses, alternate universes, different dimensions, but there's never any inkling is that all the same thing? Are you talking about the same thing there? Are you using different words to describe the same thing? And it does it makes it difficult to understand. Now, I'm sure, much like yourself, being an avid geek and follower of these things, I've got my own head canon with all the information they've given me, and I make it work in my head. I understand kind of what they're doing, but I also appreciate that I'm not the average like moviegoer, and so something you do need to kind of break it down a little bit for them. Very quick sidebar. 100% agree with you with Multiverse of Madness. I think it's a terrific film. This is another movie that almost every guest we've had on Podcast 616 is unhappy with Multiverse of Madness. They just do not like it. I think I found maybe 1 or 2 guests over the last year who've enjoyed it as well. But yeah.
Well, I'm scheduled to be on soon, so I'll be I'm one of the pro column. So you'll have one at least who's been on it.
Well, I mean, Ashley, and I don't want to reduce this to this, but it feels like there's a division of a line between our male guests and our female guests, and that our female guests really don't like it because of the treatment of Wanda in that movie, and the way that her grief is used as a weapon. I totally get it. I totally understand where they're coming from. And we've got a frequent guest. She's an Irish journalist and entertainment journalist, Dee Malumbi, and she kind of put it most eloquently on the podcast, I felt, and really helped me to understand what it was that didn't click for her. And then afterwards, I still I still disagree. It still works for me. You know, I get enough out of it. And I don't know about you, Perry, but I still view it as the midway point of Wanda's story. I mean, if this is the end of her story, I think all the criticisms are correct. You know, they've wasted that character, and they've really let her down from a writing standpoint. But this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where I've been trained to understand that this is just part 1 or part 2 of her story. So a year or 2 from now, if there's no other Wanda projects, then I think it's a problem. But at the moment, no. I'm quite happy to wait and see what the next one comes.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get that's my biggest criticism of the movie is what they did with Wanda, and but I think I'm not as I know some people have said, and even Elizabeth Olsen has said this. She said that, you know, she felt that Multiverse of Madness, they didn't know what had happened in WandaVision. They just, and my take on it, and I'd said this when we'd done the episode on it with Will Shorp, was that to me, it felt like she had gotten to the end of WandaVision. She knows she has this new power, and now she's trying to learn how to use it, and then she starts exploring the Darkhold. My take on her, on everything that she does in Multiverse of Madness, is she's being corrupted by the Darkhold, and it's not, and it's a different. I feel the movie did not do a good job explaining that, and maybe that wasn't exactly their intention either. That's totally fair, but I think that's how my headcanon explained that.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I also would say that I don't think Sam Raimi knows what a WandaVision is. I think he was given maybe like a sheet with maybe like 10 bullet points on it that explained what happened in that show. But I think what really happened is Sam Raimi came on board and they told him, right, you've got this terrifying ultimate power level witch with the Book of the Dead in her possession, and that's all Sam Raimi heard. So excellent, what a great villain, I'm going to use that. And so the Sam Raimi nerd in me was just very forgiving of that interpretation of evil Wanda. And I have a lot of confidence in them because they know how popular a character Wanda is. So I've got every confidence in them that that's something that they'll address down the line. So I'll give them the opportunity to do so before I get too grumpy about it.
Yeah. All right. Now let's talk about Caecilius in this movie, because you'd mentioned that Rachel McAdams and I agree with you. I think she's kind of, for an actress as talented as she is, I feel like she is a little bit wasted in the MCU. I feel like she could have, she could have been like the Invisible Woman now or something like that. Like, and that would have been incredible.
Very much so.
But like, I feel like the bigger waste is Mads Mikkelsen. Like, I mean, this guy is just such an incredible actor. And when we're talking now, bringing in the Fantastic Four, and people are talking about, well, who should play Doom? And I'm like, we had the perfect fucking actor for Doom right there, and we wasted him on this throwaway character.
Yeah, so this is like, so when I was doing my notes for this show, like that was what I'd written down. Above all else, the main issue in this film is Caecilius, because it's so flimsy a character. There's nothing to grab onto there. I think also Chiwetel Ejiofor's Baron Mordo suffers from this as well. The difference is Mordo gets more screen time and more interaction with Strange, and so the strength of that actor kind of he does all the heavy lifting for that character rather than the script. So I think Mordo,
and we can also have him come back too. He survived. Yeah. So like we get him in, we get a variant in Multiverse of Madness, and we still have, I don't know what universe this is. I know some called it 616, others have called it a different one, so I'm not sure what exactly it is. But it's he's still out there. He still can come back, so we can see more of him. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And sorry, go ahead.
I actually think the entire film it's got 3 or 4 actors that are utterly wasted. I think so. Chiwetel Ejiofor, I think, does okay with what's there, but there's not enough. Rachel McAdams, I really don't understand why she was cast in this role if they didn't have bigger plans for her, because it's so sort of like slight. There's nothing to it. I think another actor who's criminally wasted here is Michael Stuhlbarg, as Strange's rival doctor. Michael Stuhlbarg is a phenomenal actor. You want to talk about guys who could play Doctor Doom? I think Michael Stuhlbarg would have been a great Doctor Doom as well. I think he's got such range. He's such an intense actor. But again, here it's so like you could have cast anyone in that role and it would have made no difference because there's nothing to it. And yeah, the biggest, the most criminal waste is Mads Mikkelsen, who is one of my all-time favourite actors. Hannibal is one of my favourite shows. It's definitely in my top 5. And look, when I heard he was in this, I was so excited. I thought, excellent, this is what we need, like a proper... Because Mads Mikkelsen can do scary very well when he wants to. He's got such range, but I can't grip onto anything that he does because... I think his backstory is explained in maybe 2 sentences when Mordo's talking about him, and even then it's very vague. It's like, oh yeah, he disagrees with the Ancient One's teachings, and he discovered something that he didn't like, and then he turned on her. So, oh, okay, but I need more than that.
Yeah.
And similarly, Mikkelsen's let's say the range that he's got means that he's very good when he's on screen. he delivers the sort of the funny one-liners that we have as well quite well. I think he's very good at that.
It's a ridiculous exchange, but I still laugh about the Mr. Doctor thing.
Mr. Doctor.
I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, like you're clearly part of the real world. You know how these naming conventions work, but it's still funny.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, I think it's Mickelson's delivery of the line that kind of makes it work.
Yeah.
As I've used this phrase a few times, but it's true. It's the matter of factness of it. It's like when he says, "It's strange." He goes, "Who am I to judge?" No, he's very, very dismissive of it. I love it. But yeah, it's baffling, isn't it, that they didn't build. I really like Dormammu, and I'm a big H.P. Lovecraft fan, right? I love the idea of these terrifying, unknowable, ancient gods, just out with our realm of reality, who could smite us all in a heartbeat if they were ever given access to all that stuff. I find sort of the existential dread of that, I find brilliantly terrifying. And Dormammu as a villain is brilliant, and but like you don't really get any sense of Caecilius's overall plan. What he wants everybody in the world to join the dark dimension, but why? Like, what's your end goal? To live forever? Like, it's all so nebulous. I don't think it really works.
Yeah, I agree, and I feel like too. I mean, if you're gonna get Mads Mikkelsen in your movie, like he should have been Dormammu. Like, make Dormammu the. I feel like as much as I like how this movie set up the idea of magic in the MCU, I feel like its biggest failing is that it's too much setup. And it feels like they're setting up too much stuff for sequels with Mordo, with Dormammu, and it's not explored enough in this movie. And I think I would have liked a little bit less setup and a little bit more active stuff happening in this movie.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The Mordo stuff you mentioned in particular, like his character arc here doesn't quite make sense. I don't really buy his ultimate heel turn, where he goes full villain at the end, because I don't really think there's enough in the film to justify it. He turns on the Ancient One, or like her methodology. It's not really explained well enough, that she's drawing power from the dark dimension. That's never really explained why it's such a terrible thing. Do you know what I mean? As an audience, we're just meant to accept that that's the case. Whereas Wong and Strange don't really bat an eyelid at it. They just kind of accept it.
The whole idea of like, we preserve the natural law, and it's like, no, you don't. Like that whole thing, it doesn't make sense to me at all. I'm like, you're freaking sorcerers. You're not preserving the natural law. You're opening portals to Mount Everest, and you're jumping all around the place with these magic boots. You're not preserving natural law at all. So yeah, that didn't. And I feel like there is a way to explore that, right? The idea of like, well, yes, we bend the rules so that somebody else can't break them. There's a way to do that, but I think you're right. I don't think the movie really sold that the Ancient One took that too far. There wasn't enough to find out about why she took it too far, why what she did is a problem compared to what they're doing. Like I did not get that sense at all. So yeah, that was a weakness for me, was the whole idea of the Ancient One, her corruption or whatever it was. Like I don't even know how to really describe it because it's just so poorly defined in the movie.
Yeah. I also think that the delay between like this movie and the sequel kind of robbed the Baron Mordo story of any agency or any interest whatsoever, because they seem to just have dropped that, don't they, in between films? The idea of Mordo traveling the world and like taking on wizards, removing their power because he feels there's too much magic in the world. I don't think the film sells it well enough, but it is a nice hook to leave it on for when we're going to return to him and find out what came next. So I do find that quite interesting that seems to have just been forgotten about because they don't have enough time, or the studio has moved on to in a different direction. And again, as much as I like Multiverse of Madness, it's a big disappointment to me that Derrickson didn't come back for the sequel, because I think Multiverse of Madness was billed as the MCU's first horror movie, and it's not really, it kind of has moments here and there, but it doesn't quite land there for me. I think Derrickson maybe would have done more with that Mordo plotline. I think he'd have tied that into the Nightmare story that he wanted to do as well.
Right.
So I mean that does kind of leave me quite disappointed. There was an interesting thread as well that's brought up in the film, but they don't really focus on, which is the revelation to Strange about maybe 2/3 of the way through the film that, well, it's not enough to come to Camartage and learn these skills. You're also expected to become like a warrior, to help repel these forces of magic. And he's rightfully like shocked by this. It's like, I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm a doctor. I'm not here to kill people. And that's such a great idea, but it's so half-formed in the movie. And again, you just think maybe a sequel that was a bit closer to this one maybe would have tied into those themes a little better and carried that notion forward, because Strange's rejection of that is very quickly just undone. He says, "No, I don't want to do that," and then by the end of the film, well, actually, it's okay. Yeah, we'll do that. It's fine. And I feel like they needed to do a bit more legwork to make that kind of land for me, and I don't think it quite hits.
There are a few things in there that you'd said, and on the one hand, I would have loved to see more stuff from Scott Derrickson. On the other hand, Sam Raimi is just like the perfect director for Doctor Strange, right? He's such a superhero fan. He's such a fan of comic books, and he's such a fan of horror. And like, this is like the perfect Doctor Strange is the perfect character to meld those two loves of his together.
Yeah.
I mean, like, his Spider-Man movies are classic, but I did feel like his style of humor does not work for Spider-Man at all. Whereas it works for something in Doctor Strange, because it's this, you can do like the campy horror human Doctor Strange and it works. It works.
Yeah.
Scott Derrickson, I think and I would love to see Scott Derrickson do more stuff for Marvel. You know what I would love to see is, forget about the Hellstrom TV show, have him do like a Hellstorm Son of Satan movie or something like that. I think I would love to see that. That would be it. And then he could also play with these, because I think a character like Damon Hellstrom would be much closer to the kind of character that he'd have a better handle on. And also, the whole stuff with I agree with you too. My biggest problem with Multiverse of Madness is that it's not a Doctor Strange movie. It should have been called Multiverse of Madness featuring Doctor Strange or something like that, because it does not feel like a Doctor Strange movie. He feels almost like a supporting character in some senses. It feels, and I feel like I would have much preferred, as much as I do like a lot in Multiverse of Madness, I would have rather it was just called Multiverse of Madness and billed as like a Doctor Strange Scarlet Witch crossover or something like that. And then he also had like a Doctor Strange 2 to go along with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. What do you make of the rumors kind of circulating at the moment that Sam Raimi might be being tapped up to do the Secret Wars movie in a couple of years? I've seen that reported in a few different outlets.
I have not heard about that, but I don't know. I feel like I'm not so sure if that would work. I mean, I could be proven wrong, because, the Russos their only thing they had been known for was Arrested Development and Community before they did, the Winter Soldier. So you never know. But like, my gut instinct is that he doesn't feel like the best fit for Secret Wars. He doesn't feel like the best fit for like a big multiversal sci-fi thing. I'm not sure who would be either at the same time. So I'm not sure. So I don't know who I would rather see doing that. So, but I'm just biased because I'd rather see him get to do a proper Doctor Strange movie.
Yeah. I mean, I on one hand, as I said, the Raimi fanboy in me thinks, yeah, give him it. Let me see what he does with that, because that'd be fascinating to see what does Sam Raimi's Avengers movie look like? I don't really know where to begin with that. That's fascinating. But I still secretly hope that they maybe got an eye on Ryan Coogler for that movie, because he's a director who, even out with the Black Panther movies, he's a director that I've got a lot of time for. I think he's a really interesting guy. And he's someone I think would bring a really unique flavour to that film. So, again, I'm a bit like you. I don't really have a preferred director, but like, the idea of Raimi excites me just because it feels like it shouldn't work. But then, yeah, I've got confidence in him to bring something unique to the table. So I'd be fascinated to see if it does come to pass.
It'd be interesting to see. Like, I wouldn't say no to it, obviously, right? But it's just like, but my preference would be for him to do a proper Doctor Strange movie. Like, have him go up against, have him really lean into the horror stuff. Have him go up against Nightmare or something like that. Like Scott Derrickson wanted to do. I mean, now that we've got Clea in, at the end of Multiverse of Madness, I would really love to see like how he deals with that. And Charlize Theron as Clea is just like perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great casting. It'd just be interesting. Let's say, I mean, where we go from here is fascinating, isn't it? Because you don't really know when you'll see Doctor Strange again in the MCU, and I like that he's just kind of out there, and you could literally show up in any of the next phase worth of movies.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be fascinating to see where he comes. The other thing I wanted to touch on was just the ending of this film, or the actual sort of like the final set piece. Just when we were talking about the sort of the unique stuff that Derrickson brings to this movie, the balls on the guy to do that finale where like, you know, we're used to the big Marvel showdown, you know, fisticuffs, crazy fight scenes, all that stuff, and he totally undercuts it by having Strange show up after the battle has already been lost. And then rather than indulge in the battle and fight everyone, he just reverses everything that we've seen. He just undoes the damage that's been caused. Again, visually, it looks amazing. I mean, that scene is astounding as he kind of rebuilds the Sanctum and the destroyed city. And then, you know, we end on that magnificent showdown between Strange and Dormammu. And the phrase, Dormammu, I've come to bargain, has been burned into my brain from watching this film so many times. And it's fun. They allow Strange's intellect to defeat the villain rather than any, like, you know, power or strength. He outwits him. He puts him in a position that he can't possibly win. And again, there aren't a lot of Marvel movies that would have the courage or the conviction to end like that. The whole film is about Strange adapting to his new life and what he's become, but not betraying or letting go of his intellect or his beliefs. And so rather than fighting everyone and killing all these bad guys, the way he wins or saves the day is not by killing the villains, but by outsmarting them and putting them in an unwinnable position, which I love.
It also does a really fascinating way of addressing a paradox you have with the Doctor Strange origin movie, because Doctor Strange's role in the Marvel universe is that he's supposed to be the smart guy, the one you go to when all other hope is lost, when you have all these unanswered questions. He's supposed to be the one who has the experience and the knowledge to show you what to do next. And how do you do that when he's just started out, right? How do you do that when he's just had an origin story? It doesn't, those two things don't quite work. Why is he tapped as Sorcerer Supreme when there are other people who've been training for years? And this movie gives you that perfect explanation. Well, he was trapped in this time loop. So he had, you know, how many years of experience learning how to use magic in that time loop. And it gives you that perfect explanation right there. That's how he's able to get to this level so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as well. That's another slight issue I have with the film, that is just that it's difficult to know how much time has passed from his car accident to the end of the movie. You know, I mean, because you've got to imagine it's been several years. You know, because he's completely. I mean, the mess that his hands were in. That is a proper horror movie moment, actually, when he wakes up from his accident and he looks at his hands. The body horror imagery there is genuinely, it just sends shivers through me as he sees his hands.
Because, and also too, I keep getting hung up on the line when he's in the car and he's looking through all those patients. And one of the patients is, you know, a 35-year-old, you know, military soldier who died in some experimental armor. And I'm just like, and at first, when that movie came out, I remember everyone saying, "Oh, they're talking about Rhodey in Civil War," and now I'm thinking about it. I'm just like, maybe they're talking about the guys at the beginning of Iron Man 2 when he's going through and he's showing all the footage of the testing. That, I mean, like, and that would actually fit in well. And you're right, that could have been. It would also explain why he's so surprised about the multiverse stuff and all this, because in a world where New York has been invaded by space aliens, you think this wouldn't be as surprising.
I know Marvel keeps
but then we have the problem. But then we have the problem too in Endgame when Hulk goes to meet the Ancient One and she says, "No, Stephen Strange is operating 5 blocks away from right now." So you know, and I'm just like, I think I would have probably had it where he was in Kamartaj at that time or something. Would have made more sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to say, Marvel are continually threatening to release this official timeline that they keep going on about. They said they've got a book coming, and I can't wait to read it, because, like, I don't know how it can make any sense at all. You know, I think they've done a good job at keeping it nicely vague. You know, where you can kind of, again, your own head canon will kind of keep you right, and you can kind of you can hand wave things away that don't quite make sense, and that's fine. So I am looking forward to seeing them put it down on paper and commit to telling us, right, this is when each thing happens and how they happen in relation to one another, because yeah, I don't really think it adds up. But yeah, I
No.
remain open minded, and I look forward to seeing it.
But I think that's the problem anytime you're doing these superhero things. Like, DC continuity is just a complete mess. It's just like, it's like all these different crises. You never know what is in continuity, what is not. And it's just like, I think people get way too hung up on continuity. And I think it's just like, I think it would work better if people just had more of a vague idea instead of trying to find a definitive way to explain all this stuff.
Yeah, like I said, for me, I've got my own sort of vague headcanon of how it all connects, and that's enough. I think the film largely does enough to give you that. I just think this movie in particular, because time is the theme of the film, isn't it? Kind of the recurring beats that happen, and it feels like it should have been a long time from point A to point B.
Yeah,
but it's hard to get any gauge from that, because obviously when he eventually sees Christine again, her reaction to him is very much like she hasn't seen him for years. It's been a long time since she's seen him. And again, he is quite proficient with his magical skills by a certain point in the film. And it's hard to know how long he's been there. He's learning Sanskrit, and he's been through all these books. And he's memorizing all these spells. So I don't know. I don't think it's a huge feeling of the film, but it is something that I always wonder every time I go back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Also, like I'm of two minds of the time stone's use here. On the one hand, I think they did find a really clever way to use it. And, like we said, with him locking him and Dormammu in the time loop and everything, and the whole rebuilding that he does, all of that works really well. But at the same time, I feel like you lose something from the lore by having the Eye of Agamotto just be the time stone instead of being its own thing.
Yeah, there you go. Again, that it comes back to that thing we talked about earlier about what you bring to it as a moviegoer versus what you bring to it as a comics fan. And again, as someone who wasn't that familiar with Doctor Strange and his mythos, I don't really think I batted an eyelid. In fact, before the movie had begun, I was convinced that that's what it was going to be in the Eye of Agamotto, would be an Infinity Stone, because I remember that at that point in the sort of the Infinity Saga, there was a lot of fun and sort of waiting to see when the next stone would show up and where it would show up. And it did feel like the time stone was a bit of a no-brainer to have, be one of Doctor Strange's in his sort of toolbox. So yeah, when Wong kind of fairly heavy-handedly, explains that it's an Infinity Stone, and Steven's like, "What? What's an Infinity Stone?" It's a bit too on the nose, but it's okay. So I don't mind it being used there, and again, that pays off really well when we get to Infinity War and Endgame.
I think this kind of shows the lack of long-term planning that was going on at Marvel at that time too, because you have Doctor Strange there. The obvious one for him would be the Soul Stone. But they already gave that to Vision, so they couldn't use it.
Yeah. Well, I take on board what you mean about the long-term planning here, because I even found the use of the phrase multiverse in this film to be a bit sort of like, I remember sort of like squinting my eyes slightly at that and raising an eyebrow. Like, really, you're talking about multiverse, but are you talking about the mirror universe and the dark dimension? Is that what you're talking about when you say multiverse?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing when I was rewatching it last night.
And I do think that they're maybe trying to retroactively fit that in to mean what they want it to mean. And I've got no issue with the films doing that, but it just further muddies the waters of what the multiverse is within the confines of the MCU.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's probably why it's better to keep it vague as opposed to having some explicit explanation of it. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all to say about Doctor Strange. There are definite issues that I have with this movie, but most of all, I think it is overall. I think I do prefer this as among the origin story movies. This is definitely one of my favorites, and Cumberbatch just does such a good job of making Strange an appealing character, which even in the comics is hard to do. Like he's always seems better as a supporting character as opposed to being like a headlining character himself. But Cumberbatch does a really good job of making him work here.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that's one of the movie's strengths is its casting of Cumberbatch in the title role. Obviously, I think it's quite well known that Derrickson's first choice for the role was Ethan Hawke. That's who he had been offered the role, and he turned it down at that point. And I would like that's kind of like one of the sort of the great lost Marvel projects, because I think Ethan Hawke would have been wonderful in very different ways.
Yeah.
Like he'd have done something different with the character. But yeah, the film that they give us, I think, is really good. I'm always amazed that it gets forgotten about when people are talking about like the great origin stories in Marvel, because it really does. It does feel like it's kind of the black sheep of the origin story family. Because every time I go back to it, I'm always amazed at how good it is and how. You know what I mean? I almost trick myself. I almost think, because no one else talks about it, and it's dismissed often. I think I myself sometimes in my head think, oh, maybe it's not as good as I remember it. And then I go back to it and think, no, actually, yeah, it's really, really good. Yeah, it stands up really well, and it gives you a good grounding for that character, because it was so important that he landed well. Never mind the film; it was so important that he landed well, because by that point they already, I think, had penned him in as being one of the sort of the more pivotal characters in Infinity War. Right. And I think if he doesn't hit the ground running here, then that's a big rethink that they need to do. So, I mean, I recommend this film to a lot of people. It's a lovely place to jump into the MCU.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's all well said. There's one thing I wanted to mention about it, but I'm drawing a blank right now, and I'll probably remember it as soon as we stop recording.
The only other thing we haven't really spoken about is the first post-credits thing, which is when Thor comes a calling to the Sanctum Sanctorum. And I remember in the cinema, just like, it's just so much fun. I just love seeing Strange interact with these characters, and it's brilliant. And when we get that scene, when it eventually does show up in Ragnarok, it's so superfluous and unnecessary. But I don't care, because I love it.
I love that scene. It's so great.
Yeah. I'm happy to spend time in the company of these characters, doing that, just sitting and talking. I don't care if it feels like we're kind of squeezing them in when they don't need to be there. It's like, that's part of the fun of having a universe with that kind of interconnectivity, isn't it? That you can have people show up at any point from other films. And I think it's a terrific amount of fun.
It also makes sense because, the whole point of the sorcerers, that they're supposed to be guarding this plane of existence. So, the guy who caused an alien invasion suddenly pops up again. The sorcerers are probably going to want to have a word with him. So that makes that totally made sense for me. And it's a great way to kind of show this role that Strange has in the MCU now, where he's the guy you go to when weird shit happens. So I thought that it worked great. I loved it. It felt like something just out of a comic book. It's like, oh, fuck, what do we do now? Let's go to Doctor Strange. And although my big question is, what happened to his yellow gloves? Because we see them in there, and we never see him again.
I suspect that they were met with derision at a focus group somewhere, and they just decided, yep, no more gloves, let's just get rid of them. Because I actually think it does look a little bit too much like a costume at that point when he's got those gloves on, And I get obviously the idea of him wanting to hide his hands and what's happened to them, but it's much more elegant, I think, without those big gaudy yellow gloves.
Yeah. I think they could have done a better job on the gloves, I think, but it would have been interesting to see him pop back up. Overall, I think it's a great movie. There's some issues as to like where all this fits in, over how long of a time period it takes, and obviously my stuff with the time stone. Oh, and just a little Easter egg. I'm not sure if you caught the guy who was the guardian of the Sanctum in New York.
Oh no, I don't think I did.
So it's Daniel Drum. He's the brother of Jericho Drum, and Jericho Drum becomes Brother Voodoo in the comics. Later, Dr. Voodoo. Yeah, so that was a nice little Easter egg.
I wonder if that's a character that they'll touch, Dr. Voodoo. That feels a little bit...
I wonder, yeah. I mean, I think there's a way to do it. I think there's a way to do all this stuff. Like, I mean, they were able to do the Mandarin, so I think Dr. Voodoo would not be too much of a leap.
That's true.
I hope they get around to it at some point. I think that would be interesting. Might make for a good Disney Plus, especially now that we're getting more of the horror stuff with, like, the Halloween special with Werewolf by Night, and Man Thing was in that too. We're supposedly getting Blade at some point. We'll see.
Well, I saw that there was another one of those like investor things where there was an image leaked, and I've seen it in 2 or 3 other places where there was a logo for a TV show called Tales from the Darkhold, and it's like It's like, that's a great idea for a Halloween special, for another
Yes,
one of us.
yeah.
Give us like a 1 hour, like 3 short stories anthology horror. I think that would be perfect. Yeah,
Oh
I'd love
yeah,
to see
yeah,
them do something like
yeah.
that.
That would be really cool. Yeah, I'd love to see. I love Marvel horror. I would love to see them do more with that, and especially now that Marvel TV is done. Like I want to see Hellstorm adapted properly. I want to see Ghost Rider come back in. So I think those things would be so much fun to
Yes.
see.
Yeah, Ghost Rider's the one I'm kind of holding out hope for, because I quite liked his use in Agents of Shield. I thought the representation there was really good. But yeah, give me a Ghost Rider, even if it's a one shot, like one of those special
Right.
presentations. Give
Yeah.
me that, and then he can show up again in another movie somewhere
Yeah.
down the road. But yeah, I'd be happy to see that.
My only issue with his portrayal in Agents of Shield is I prefer the Johnny Blaze Ghost Rider to the Robbie Reyes one. That's the only thing. But otherwise, I thought it was. And they let the door open for John Blaze in that anyway when they introduced him.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I don't know. Maybe we'll see Nick Cage pop up in Secret Wars.
I think I'm in Secret Wars, Perry. I think everybody who's alive at any point will be in Secret Wars. So yeah, I'm sure Nick Cage will show up at some point.
Yeah. Well, apparently he appears in. This is a bit of a spoiler, but apparently he appears in a scene in the new Flash movie.
Yeah, I mean, I will go see the new Flash movie. I've kind of hummed and hawed about it for a long time. My 16-year-old daughter. Do you know what? Full credit to her. She put her foot down and she doesn't want to see it because of all the Ezra Miller stuff, and I totally respect that. But I'll be honest, the comic book geek in me can't resist Michael Keaton's Batman. I don't care what the film's like. I'll go for that.
I'm with you 100%. Like, my hatred of Ezra Miller is outweighed by my love of seeing Michael Keaton on the big screen as Batman one last time.
Yeah, I wish I could hold on to my principles a little bit better than my daughter does, but I do want to see Michael Keaton one last time. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Especially because it doesn't look like we'll be getting Batman Begins, or Batman Beyond. I mean,
yeah, that's true. That's true.
All right, Hugh. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I'm glad we were able to get this organized, because with you in the UK, me in Japan, we had some trouble trying to schedule times here. But I'm glad we were able to make it happen. So why don't you tell people where they can find your stuff?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun. This is a movie I've been desperate to talk about for a long time, but like we've never had an excuse on the podcast to get to it. So thank you very much for letting me come on and talk about it. So yeah, if you're looking for me, the best place to find me is on Twitter. I am over there at Angry Scotsman 81. That's where all my links will be for my writing. I also can be found on the We Made This network. I'm the co-host, as I said earlier, of Podcast-616, a Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, and also of Vampire Videos, which I co-host with Dan Owen. That's just entering, crikey, I think we're just about to end our 3rd season on Vampire Videos, which is crazy. And we've covered so many great films, and yeah, we've got season 4 pretty much locked down as well, so lots more to come there. So yeah, please reach out, give me a shout if you want to hear any more of my insane ramblings, and I'll be happy to share them with you.
Okay, great. And we'll have links to all that stuff in the show notes. As for us, we are superherocine.com, Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram. Remember, you subscribe to the Patreon page, you get these episodes a week in advance, no ads. Plus, you get the access to the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club, where once a month we talk about comic books and graphic novels. All of that for just $1 a month. So not too much that's going to break your bank. Anyway, thanks so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time.